Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a seriously epic journey of survival, ambition, and some incredibly calculated risks. You know, the company that now generates over $30 billion in sales absolutely didn't start in some massive corporate boardroom. Nope, it started with a lost 24-year-old, a terrified bluff in Japan, and a car trunk full of shoes. So let's explore exactly how it all happened.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Picture this. The year is 1962, and Phil Knight is in Kobe, Japan. He's somehow managed to secure a meeting with the executives of Onitsuka, the makers of Tiger running shoes. He's pitching himself as a major American shoe distributor, but the reality, he has exactly zero experience. Nothing. So when the Japanese executives asked him what company he was from, his heart literally hammered in his chest. In a moment of sheer panic, his mind flashes to his childhood bedroom wall, and he just blurts out, "Gentlemen, I represent Blue Ribbon Sports of Portland, Oregon. It was a completely fake company, invented right there on the spot. But you know what? That single bluff secured the deal that would totally change sports history."
Section 1. The Crazy Idea. Finding Purpose in Running Shoes. Let's look at how a lost kid with $0 actually got himself into that Japanese boardroom in the first place.
If you look at this timeline, you'll see a young man who is kind of just drifting. Phil Knight graduated with a journalism degree in 1959. He really wanted to be a professional athlete, but, well, he just wasn't fast enough. He served in the Army for a year, still feeling totally lost. It actually wasn't until he enrolled in business school at Stanford that he had this profound realization, his crazy idea. He had noticed cheaper, high-quality Japanese cameras displacing German ones and asked a really simple question. Why couldn't Japanese running shoes do the exact same thing to dominant German brands like Adidas and Puma? He saw a massive gap in the market, and in 1962, he traveled to Kobe to exploit it.
Section 2. Blue Ribbon Sports. Building a brand from a car trunk. Let's explore the super scrappy early days of this freshly invented company.
So, when Knight's first 12 sample pairs finally arrived from Japan, he didn't waste a second. He took them straight to his former college track coach, a highly respected guy named Bill Bowerman. Now, Bowerman wasn't just a coach. He was an obsessed tinkerer. Notice his R&D process here. It was incredibly hands-on. He would literally rip apart those imported Japanese shoes, add more cushion or lightweight materials, stitch them all back together, and test them directly on his runners. Bowerman loved those initial Onitsuka Tiger imports so much that he offered to become Knight's business partner.
The contrast between the multi-billion-dollar Nike we know today and these extremely humble milestones is just staggering. The two co-founders invested a mere $500 each. They used that to order 300 pairs of shoes at roughly $3.33 a pair. And because sporting goods stores absolutely wouldn't give Knight the time of day, he literally sold these shoes straight out of the trunk of his car at local track meets. The big takeaway here? When you're cash poor and have zero leverage, your personal conviction in your product is your only marketing tool. And by the end of year one, that conviction generated $8,000 in sales.
Section 3. Betrayal and Rebirth. The ultimatum that sparked an empire. Because, as anyone in business will tell you, the road to $1 billion is almost never smooth.
By 1969, business was actually booming. Bowerman had designed a massive hit shoe called the Cortez, and sales had reached $300,000. But right at that moment of success, an existential threat arrived. Their supplier, Onitsuka, was secretly plotting to replace them with more experienced East Coast distributors. In a really tense meeting, Onitsuka delivered a brutal ultimatum. Sell us 51% of Blue Ribbon Sports, or we walk away entirely. Look at Knight's pivot here. The stakes are incredibly high, but rather than cave to a hostile takeover, he boldly rejected the offer. He took a massive risk and decided they wouldn't just distribute anymore. They were going to manufacture their own shoes.
Now, what's really fascinating about this slide is how completely haphazard the birth of this iconic brand truly was. I mean, they needed a new name immediately. The very first employee, Jeff Johnson, claimed the name came to him in a dream the night before. Nike, the Greek goddess of victory. Knight wasn't even that keen on the name, to be honest, but they were totally out of time. And that legendary swoosh logo? They recruited a local university graphic design student to draw it and paid her a grand total of $35. Mere pocket change for what would become one of the most famous logos in history.
Section 4. The $25 million threat. Fighting for survival. The rebirth into Nike was successful, but a letter from the U.S. government nearly killed the newly minted brand overnight.
Imagine opening your mail one morning to find a bill from the U.S. Customs Service for $25 million. At first, Phil Knight thought it was a joke. It definitely wasn't. For a company that was incredibly cash poor and borrowing heavily just to fund its rapid expansion, a $25 million fine meant one thing: immediate bankruptcy.
So what does this all mean? Well, the reason for the massive bill was an archaic pre-Great Depression law called the American Selling Price, or ASP. American competitors like Keds and Converse were terrified of Nike's explosive growth, so they heavily lobbied the government to enforce ASP. This is a classic example of legacy companies weaponizing the law against disruptive startups. All competitors had to do was make an expensive American copy of a Nike shoe, and Nike would be forced to pay a massive 20% import duty based on that competitor's much higher price. The government backdated these fees for 3 whole years, hitting Nike with that $25 million bill. Knight fought a brutal 3-year legal war over this, eventually settling for $9 million just to keep the lights on.
Section 5, The Dark Secret, Scandals in the Supply Chain. Nike survived, and Phil Knight became a wildly wealthy man. But as we move into the 90s, the newly public company faced a very different kind of crisis.
The brand's explosive success was soon shadowed by severe ethical allegations regarding its overseas manufacturing. In 1991, activist Jeffrey Ballinger published a report titled Behind the Swoosh. The report claimed that workers in underdeveloped countries were living in slums, denied basic amenities, and paid roughly $1.25 a day. Later, a 2001 BBC documentary uncovered claims of child labor in a Cambodian factory, focusing on girls working up to 16-hour days. As you might expect, the public fallout was massive. It led to widespread university boycotts and a 15% drop in Nike's stock price.
In response to this crisis, Nike pledged to improve global factory conditions and spent the next decade implementing rigorous factory audits. The company's defense highlighted that they did not directly own these factories, but rather rented space alongside other major multinational brands, arguing that this was actually an industry-wide issue. While human rights groups did acknowledge Nike's efforts to fix conditions, the objective reality was that this remained a complex, ongoing challenge. Further complaints surfaced in subsequent reports in 2005 and again in 2021.
Section 6. Navigating Controversy. Risk versus Reward in Marketing. Moving into the modern era, let's examine how Nike deliberately navigates and leans into cultural flashpoints as a core business strategy.
In 2018, Nike deliberately stepped right into a highly polarized cultural conversation. They launched a Just Do It campaign featuring former NFL player Colin Kaepernick, who had sparked a major political firestorm by kneeling during the national anthem to protest racial injustice. The ad featured this bold quote, "Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything." The immediate reaction was incredibly volatile. People were burning their Nike shoes on social media, widespread boycotts were declared, and the company's stock dipped by 2.5%. And this brilliantly illustrates Nike's highly calculated approach to risk and reward. Because while the initial backlash was extremely loud, the long-term result was staggering. A massive wave of consumers rallied behind the brand's stance. This calculated risk ultimately drove a 31% bump in sales. The campaign earned an Emmy Award and added a reported $6 billion to Nike's overall brand value. But, courting controversy to drive growth isn't a new strategy for Nike. Their marketing team meticulously weighs risk against reward. Just look at the first decade of the Just Do It campaign, running from 1988 to 1998. During this time, they ran ads tackling ageism, featuring an 80-year-old marathon runner, and in 1995, they featured an HIV-positive runner. By leaning into these bold, sometimes controversial narratives, revenue absolutely exploded, from $800 million to $9.2 billion in just 10 years. From a lost kid selling shoes out of his car trunk to navigating global controversies and building a $30 billion empire, Phil Knight's story proves that the timing is literally never going to be perfect. Sometimes you just have to take that leap of faith and create your own opportunity. So looking at everything we've explored today, it leaves us with one pretty powerful question to ask yourself. What's your crazy idea?